what the Greens are supposed to be doing in the United States. And recognizing that we need a coherent outlook, which I would submit as the view advanced by social ecology, which is multifaceted and multi-layered, as it were, and embraces not only our relationship with nature, but our relationship with other human beings, and makes it a keystone of every position that it holds, that in order to eliminate the destruction of the natural world and the myth of dominating the natural world, we have to eliminate the reality of the domination of human. That's why the word social has been put in front of the word ecology, and not some other adjective to describe it. And that's all I have to say. Please.
You were talking about how this grassroots, face-to-face participation in community could become oppressive, where women and blacks would be excluded, and that you have to develop a certain consciousness for that not to occur. And I wanted to ask you about how that could be done, or how you see that being done.
By developing a movement that is at once not only educational, but is above all, as not only political, but above all educational.
Do you think that could be done through education?
Huh?
You think that?
Yeah. That's the only way. Ultimately, we have to rely on the power of human reason to make decisions, choices, and selections. We have to rely on that. Marx, for all his emphasis on the inexorability of the capitalist crisis and the extent to which capitalism would force the working class to overthrow capitalism would force the working class to overthrow rule by capital, still declared that it's essential that these forces produce class consciousness. And now we're talking about ecological consciousness. A movement that is not an educational movement, that is simply a movement to mobilize energy and forces without any clear idea of what its perspective will be. Such a movement may very well yield very opposite results of what it's trying to achieve. So a movement is above all not an instrument for mobilization. To a great extent, people have to do that on their own. They have to learn how to do that on their own, or else they'll never learn how to practice democracy. You know what I mean? If people do not know how to take control of public affairs, they're not going to be able to run them when the control of these public affairs, quotes, is given to them by some vanguard party or elitist party. The greatest role of a movement, which is why I eschew words like party, I don't use them. The greatest role of a movement, I never call the Greens the Green Party, I call them the Greens. And they initially began that way in Germany, calling themselves the Grünen. They didn't call themselves the Grünische Partei. You know? So this kind of function of a movement is all important. It's my personal function, you know, to do what I can on the basis of my own experience, to try to educate people, not to lead them. Not that I don't believe in people who have, you know, enough knowledge, enough background, enough wisdom to actually play the role, at least of teachers. To me, the most important, what we call leaders today, should be teachers. So they should be teachers, not just leaders. And the question is not to use knowledge to manipulate people, but to actually, as a teacher, overcome the difference between those who know less and those who know more. In which case, such a movement would be an ever-growing project, not only of educating the public, but educating itself. And I am not aware of movements that are really doing that anymore today. I'm not aware of movements that are doing that. It's not merely a question of having propaganda out there, and worse, tailoring that propaganda to suit public taste at any particular time so that you go down to the lowest common denominator. It's very important, on the contrary, to raise the standards of everyone, even if you're going to live in utmost isolation, to maintain these high standards. And one of two things is going to happen. Either history is going to go your way so that people will begin to recognize that these standards address their most basic needs, and that they should raise themselves to those standards, or else it's going to be a losing battle anyway. There's no guarantee in the end that this battle will be won. But there is only one guarantee that is very important to me, that you will retain your own integrity You know what I'm saying? In the midst of what is a totally totally subversive environment, subversive in the sense that it eats away at your own individuality, at your own personality, at your own ability to think clearly. You're always going to be a winner in the end in at least one respect, that if you can't, quotes, redeem the planet or redeem the earth, you'll at least redeem yourself. I have seen only too frequently the extent to which people, presumably with the intention of redeeming and rescuing the world, saving the world, have lost themselves in the process of doing it, because they did it in a manner that was totally unprincipled. That's why I give you that quotation from Thoreau, action from principle. The perception of right and wrong is essentially revolutionary. Give up that, and the idea of right and wrong is ours. I'm sorry.
I know we're over time already, but there's one vital piece to me that hasn't been addressed in the last 2 hours, and I'd like to hear some kind of response, and that's how does all this relate to dissolving the power of the corporations?
Yeah, capital.
Capital itself?
Corporations.
There are two ways in which any social order or its institution, state, and whatever you like, falls. One of them is you either conquer it by force or you dissolve its power to exercise its will. And this may take place under very dramatic situations. And I have no formulas for the 21st century, since I'll never see how it'll happen. But the best thing I can do is draw from history. When the Bastille fell almost 200 years ago, it was not because the people of Paris were so well armed that they could fight and conquer the soldiers, few as they were, who occupied the Bastille. So when the monarchy, in order to protect the Bastille from the crowds that surrounded it, you know what the Bastille was, a giant prison up there, which represented for all the people in the so-called working class or sans-culotte areas, the whole symbol of the tyranny, of monarchical tyranny. It's when the French guards were called out to protect the Bastille, and they suddenly turned their artillery around away from the people and faced the Bastille with their rifles or muskets, you see, that the Bastille surrendered, and the monarchy was doomed. It could call upon nothing to fight the people.